All right. This is Brent with Group 4 with Susan and Caden and Bailey demonstrating our code and also the 7 functions of, or the 7 steps of programming development.
Okay, our 7 steps of function development begin by clearly defining the problem. In this case, we needed a method to buy different inventory items, check to see that the price and quantity were both legal values, that the price times the quantity did not exceed the available money, and then we needed to increment the count of the specified inventory item by the quantity requested, and then subtract the price times the quantity from the available money. And so we created a test matrix, and we have a valid case where the parameters of the price and the quantity are reasonable amounts. And then we have 4 test cases in which, in one case, the price was negative. In the third case, the quantity was negative. In the fourth case, there was no quantity, no inventory item at all. And then in the fifth case, the price exceeded the money available, and so we get a 999 error, which then means non-sufficient funds. And then we have 2 valid cases that are testing the boundaries, and where we test the price of 0, so anything between 0 and between 200 definitely work. And then the price of 5 cents per bullet with a quantity of 0 then is also valid, and the 0 return means that it is a valid test case. This is the algorithm for the solution. And then we test that algorithm with the actual outputs that would be expected. And in this case, we actually can get 200 bullets for 0 money. Pretty cool. Here is we've translated the algorithm into code. And we have some if statements that if the price is less than 0, or the quantity is less than 0, or there is no inventory item, then it returns our -1 invalid return. And then our cost then equals the price times the quantity. We become an integer. And then the money available, we pass inventory item 8 is our money item. And then if the cost is greater than the money available, it returns the insufficient fund error code of 999. And then we have a for loop that runs through each inventory item, and if everything works out, it returns 1 for a valid test case. If not, then it returns a -1. So depending on the amount of cost and so forth. Then we run the test to verify that it works. And so in NetBeans, I can go to the inventory control test, and I can right click and run it, and test results say that it passed 100%. It returned the buy supplies each time, so that means that it passed. And then, of course, the last step is, once we know that our code passes, then we need to deploy those changes to the repository. We need to commit our changes. We need to pull. So if there's anything that's been done since we did our code that we pull it, then we push our code up to the repository and share it with others. For our Java selection statements, the if function or the if statement is used when there is only one action. And so if our price is less than 0, or the quantity is less than 0, or there is no inventory item, then it returns the invalid -1, telling us it's invalid. If the cost is greater than the money available, then it returns the 999, which is to indicate insufficient funds.
Okay, for the if-else statement, you use it when there is one condition and two alternative actions. For the change pace, if the current pace is less than 3 or greater than 17, it returns the -1, indicating an error. And else if the new pace is greater than 3 and less than 17, then you return the new pace. And then else if anything else is inputted, then it returns -1, indicating an error again.
So for the if-else, if you can use as many else-ifs as you want. You can put as many additional conditions as you want. So in this case, we are choosing the pace to assign. So here we have the condition if the new pace is 1, if the user has input 1, then it's going to return the pace steady. And then we have other conditions, new pace is 2, or else if the new pace is 3, or else if the new pace is 4, it'll assign the pace accordingly. Or in the case of 4, it'll take them to the help. And if they don't put any of those numbers, it all falls under this last else, and it'll give an error.
For the switch statement, you use it when you want to see if the value of an expression is equal to one of the items in a list of valid values. So for this switch statement, we'd get the input from the user, whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then the switch statement takes a value you get from the user and tests it against the list. And when it finds one that matches, it outputs the statement sequence associated with the match.
Okay, for the inventory control test, what we'd actually do to run the test is we right-click on the control file that we made, and for inventory control, we right-click and we go to Tools, and then we go to Create Update Tests, and it creates the test for us. And then we have to copy the block of code over and over again for however many test cases that we have. We had to remove some of the temporary fail messages and copy the basic text block for each of our test cases. And for each test, we had to set the arguments to be passed, which were the inventory item, the cost, and the quantity. We then had to set the expected return value. It sets the 3 arguments, calls the programs, and compares the return value to what you expected to return. If it matches, it prints the line by supplies. And so I showed you earlier that it passed all of those tests.
Scope and lifespan of variables. The scope is a block defines scope by the open and closed curly braces, and then a scope determines what objects are visible to other parts of the program. So if we look in NetBeans, this block has a price, this price variable, which is found to be cannot find symbol. There's an error because it is defined down here in this block. So this is outside of the scope of this block down here. And then the lifespan of a variable is how long it exists before it's destroyed, which is also defined by this scope.
So I'm going to talk about passing arguments by value and by reference, what the difference is between the two. So passing by value, well, the difference is whether you're passing an actual primitive value into the variable or if it's going to be a pointer to the place where that information is stored in the program. So if it's passing by value, you're passing an actual primitive value, like an integer, or in this case, we have a string variable here, declared current pace, and so there's some string that's going to be assigned to it. And then later on in this getInput function, it uses that, it calls that current pace variable as a parameter. And in that parameter, it's going to be the actual string that was assigned to that variable. And it's going to be used in this function, and it's going to return a string in the function. But if it's passing by reference, we have, instead of passing in a value, we're passing kind of a pointer to the address of that information in the program. So you see here, there's an instance of the player class created, and it's called player. And so then later down here in the set player function, it uses an instance of a class, and that's not a primitive value. That's an actual pointer to this instance that you declared up here. And so it's going to look over here, find out the information it needs for anything that it does in this function.
Okay. For the trail control, this is my code for it, which I showed in the if-else example, and then my test matrix. And if we head over to NetBeans, got out that, I test it. It passes 100% for all those test cases.
So here we have the create tombstone function. And so here we're just testing our inputs in the test matrix, and the character name, no limit, the is alive, it has to be false in order for them to get a tombstone, because if they're still alive and it's true, then that's going to not be valid because they don't get a tombstone because they're not dead. So it has to be false. And the miles traveled, there's no limit on that. The comment has to be less than 24 characters. So this all these characters here would not be valid. So we're gonna go to the code. Here's the code here, but I'll show you in NetBeans. There it is in the character control class. So we come down here and run the character control test. Let's run the test down here. It's doing these testing these parameters in here, and if we open up the test window, it worked 100%.
All right. For my code, I worked on character attributes, and these attributes are designed to give your character the ability to change the game from the outset. So you can make it easier for yourself maybe to cross a river later on, or medical, to heal yourself, or if somebody in your party gets sick. So what the code actually does is it goes through and it passes by reference an object of the player type, and then it passes by values all of the skill traits. And then I got the checks here at the beginning for all the if statements, just making sure everything's within bounds, that I don't have any null characters or any values that are too high or too low. We don't want to make the game too easy or too hard for people. Once all those checks are complete, you can see where it starts saying main.set scout, main.set hunt. I'm passing those values to the object instance. So starting to set those values so that the player can get those skills, those attributes, and make the game easier for themselves in those areas. For my test matrix, a valid test case is anything within range, main character, as long as it has an object there, it's going to be valid. All the different skills, they just need to be some integer between 0 and 3. And my function is a Boolean, so I wanted to say, hey, if you make it all the way through, you're true. If you don't make it all the way true, if you've got caught at one of those exceptions, then just return a false. And so if everything checks out there in the valid, which it does, it's true. In the invalid, all those things are wrong. The null is, you can't pass a null object. -1 is too low, all the 4s are too high. And in the boundary cases, anywhere between 0 and 3 for those values is what does that. And then for testing the code, and that means the code's right here. I have those same 3 tests. So this is the one that will fail. You can see I have a null, I have a -1, I have a 4. Those are all out of bounds. So that one's going to fail. These ones are all 0s. And then I have a player object, so that one's good. This one uses that same player object and everything tests on the bounds. So as I go to test it, my tests pass, but like I said, the first one fails and the next 2 pass. So that's where we've gotten so far with our code. Just a couple examples of the 7 steps that we've taken to develop a bit and demonstrate that for you. Hopefully you found it enjoyable. Thanks.